Shots fired. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Penny Dreadfuls. I'm Alex Ballinger.
And I'm Amita Joshi.
And just to confirm, this is Penny Dreadfuls, not the Penny Dreadfuls, because we are not the next big indie band from Coventry.
Yeah, that's what's written in our Brunel University website. Please ignore that. Of course, there's going to be a spelling mistake.
That is a terrible name, and we do not go by it.
No, we don't. We're not a group of 18-year-olds trying to start a band. So,
well, we kind of are, but that's a separate side project.
Yeah, we don't need to mention that.
That is
right
yet
now.
To be. So how are you feeling today, Amita?
Absolutely fine. Very glad the exams are over. Now I've got time to actually read books again.
I know.
I was sat on the tube and I was actually reading a normal book.
I had to reteach myself how to read. I was looking at some shapes.
Did you know in the first place?
Recently. It's quite fresh.
Okay.
I'm still working on Biff and Chip. I think I'm...
Yes, The Magic Key.
The Magic Key is
such great books.
Absolute classic book. We'll have to do an episode dedicated to that.
Definitely, children's books need to be covered.
Yeah, even though... Yeah, my children's books are really boring.
Children's books are boring?
No, my children's books are boring.
What were your children? Were you one of those Matilda-like boys who read adults' books when they were really young?
Matilda-like?
Yeah.
I suppose, yeah, probably a bit too old for me. I read a lot of World War II non-fiction.
Oh my God, so intense. That explains a lot.
That explains why I'm so massively interested now, and probably why my voice sounds like this. Anyway, enough with the boring introductions. Today, the serious stuff, we are going to be talking about... What are we talking about? I've forgotten already.
So a few things. First of all, the most recent news about there being or not being a ban on prison books. We'll also be discussing film adaptations of books, which is always... That's
an inevitable conversation.
Love-hate relationship, yep. And also whether you like trash novels. Not you personally, Alex, but to our listeners out there. If you do, tweet us and let us know. Do you avidly read 50 Shades of Grey?
At PDreadfulShow on Twitter.
Do you openly admit to it? Do you hide it? Or do you just think those books are ridiculous and should never be published?
Yeah, mostly, hopefully, will be the latter. And we'll also do our regular feature, which is one book I wish I'd read before. This week, it will be one book I wish I'd read before my first relationship, I think it was.
It was.
That is the one we're starting with, that we are going with this week, is it?
Yeah, it is indeed. So, book news. So, take it away with the prison story.
Yes.
Alex, you seem to know more about it.
Let me find my notes that I might have copied off of the Guardian Books website today. As of February, next week is February, I believe. It isn't it?
Week after.
Yeah, maybe. Prisons will now be allowing prisoners to read books sent in to them by family members, which was previously banned. This is after a High Court decision in December, in which an inmate who was a English lit professor, he had a doctorate in English lit, and he complained. Basically, his lawyer complained on his behalf, and they've now officially ruled that books were considered a privilege before, so you had to earn the right to books and underwear, I believe was the other thing, was one of the things that they didn't like being sent in, because underwear, like books, is a privilege to enjoy, I suppose. But that's now been overruled, and they're now allowed books because the lawyer argued that books are not a privilege.
It's interesting. It was the Ministry of Justice that actually ruled this. And that's just an incredible thought to think. There's so many serious things that they have to deal with. But one of them was actually whether we should have the freedom to read and whether we should be able to pick our own books. There's a lot of prison reading books, actually, but even they don't tell prisoners what to read. They come together and decide, so it's like a democratic decision. So it is really interesting to think that, there is a sense of how much freedom should be given around books and whether people should or shouldn't be allowed to read. I think it's really, really interesting.
I think a lot of the concern in the past was smuggling, wasn't it? There's people smuggling in drugs and that sort of thing, because apparently there can be a problem
absolutely.
with drugs, and also extremist material, because there is a lot of radicalisation in prisons. But that's what I find quite strange about the thought of that, is that a lot of, especially religious extremism, does come from inside prisons anyway, but not from books. but from other people, from being in contact with other extremists. So people find themselves in prison surrounded by people that are extremists who are then very convincing. So the thought of books being a threat to that as well is a strange thought.
It is strange, and obviously we're the last two to think that books aren't powerful, but when someone says radicalisation, nowadays I do actually just think of cyber issues rather than somebody reading Mein Kampf and thinking I'd change my life.
It seems to be far more, and I think spoken word is always far more powerful for convincing people towards ideas as well. I think that books generally don't have the sort of power that the spoken word can have in terms of raising people to causes and things like that. So I think a lot of radicalisation is face-to-face contact rather than reading of literature. And like you said, online, a lot of message boards and things like that apparently on there.
Yeah. So it is a strange... But I mean, members of the Tory party are saying they're not imposing a ban, but it's more of a restriction on possession of what you can and can't call as your own book. It's just all very weird. It's not very clear. But it is happening 1st of February onwards, which is really strange. And of course, there's a debate about whether they should be reading books which are part of their rehabilitation or books that they get to choose, which again is really strange to think that there are certain books that might cleanse you or heal you or whatever people want to call it.
Maybe this is based on the movies and the old American kind of stereotypes of prison, but I always imagine that prison is very religious in terms of a lot of people like a lot of people like the Bible
rehab.
And people will come out finding Jesus from prison and things like that. I'm not necessarily sure that is actually the case, but I would definitely agree that books seem to be they should be more part of the education and the rehabilitation than anything else, because I would say that to go into prison and to supposedly be rehabilitated would take education. And I think books are the best way of doing that, because you're not going to get that from prison guards or other prisoners. I can't imagine there's too much academic debate going on in prison. I mean, maybe that's what they do. I was thinking, what do they do then in prison? I don't really know anything about it.
They do have... I've only touched on this before, but I mean, you always read the stories about how much taxpayers' money is being used towards prisons. Obviously, you can't trust all of those stories because mainly they're on tabloid papers. I'm not mentioning any names.
Mail.
But there's a lot of, so it's however much money towards their hobbies. So they obviously do have clear routines and they're made to do certain things that are, I don't know. I just picture a load of people knitting, but that's probably not the case.
I can picture that. Or making number plates with the stereotype. I think I got that from a cartoon. But
that is definitely
I think that still stands. They do have libraries, actually. This was part of the Guardian article. I did not find this out myself. But they do have libraries, but their access to them is granted as a reward. If you're behaving well, you'll be allowed to go into the library. And sometimes they are limited to 20 minutes. And as I'm sure you can tell, based on the fact that we are making a radio show about books, 20 minutes is not quite enough to go book shopping for.
It's just a strange concept that, and in some ways a compliment to books that your reward is that you get to read. It just takes me back to, sorry, Dad, I am going to tell everyone this. When I didn't used to listen to my parents to do with something, he would actually take away my reading lamp and switch off my main light so I couldn't read before I went to sleep, and it was the worst punishment every time. I couldn't bear it. So, yeah, it is this thing about books being a reward.
Reading always used to feel like a punishment. I'm not, because I've always loved reading, but when I was in school, they used to have one morning a week in the tutor sessions when we had to sit there and read for 15 or 20 minutes.
Is it in silence?
For some reason, yeah.
I always laughed.
You can't help but laugh, can you? But for some reason, even though I loved reading, I would spend all my time outside of school reading. But as soon as someone told me to, I was like, no, I don't want it. I was just being stubborn. I was like, no, I'm not going anywhere near. I hate books. Books are stupid.
Just can't imagine you doing that now during like law or public
I've been on the
affairs.
brink.
Like, can you read chapter 5? No,
I
absolutely
refuse
not.
to read. Because I've been on the brink of tears from not being able to read based on exam stress for the last week. I'm finally trying to relearn how to look at a book.
Yeah, I mean, I going back to what you're saying though, you do have the stereotypical idea. Like, I'm thinking of American History X. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah, of course I've seen it.
But obviously, for those of you who haven't, it's a really radicalized, what is he, neo-Nazi fan who
racist,
who gets put into prison for shooting a black man in America. And then what happens is, whilst he's in prison, his former teacher brings in books. I think that's the case, and he reads all the books. And that's the idea that I have in my head, that they have a significant impact on certain stages of your life. Well, they have done in my life anyway. I can sort of map out my life according to what books I've read, or you remember what books you've read. So I do wonder whether it works, and whether this decision or ruling is a good idea. And hopefully it is.
I think it is, because prison is quite an obvious situation in which you can read, because your time has been taken away from you. You essentially have nothing to do. So I think that to read would be one of the first things people would turn to when they get in there. I mean, there's been occasions when I've been stupidly busy and I think sometimes I wish I was in prison. So I can
you
sit
just
down.
took the words out of my mouth. This is how we're both not going to end up getting a job, because we're just confessing how I want to be in prison.
Just said I would quite like to be in prison. Yeah.
But yeah, the idea that you get taken away for I don't know how long.
Taken out of society and put on the
so
sidelines.
that you just get to read sounds.
It's probably not
brilliant.
quite that nice.
No, I know.
But I looked up a few lists of books that prisoners like to read, actually. There's some American ones. A former librarian from a Boston prison said that, strangely, Anne Frank was one of them. The Diary of Anne Frank.
Oh, that I guess.
But it does make sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, because they're both trapped.
She was completely incarcerated, and I suppose she was in a far worse situation than any prisoners could be, because she was on
to creep around.
Yeah, she was on the brink of death at all times. So I think that one does make a lot of sense, actually. And also, you like this one, Sylvia Plath, apparently.
I can see that as well.
Yeah.
Not that they should be reading that, because I only actually read that book if I'm going to read it again in the summer, because it's just so. It is quite bleak. So I'm not sure why you'd read it. But also, I don't know whether there's that thing as well about when you're sad, you just want to watch a sad film so that you can cry it out. And maybe it's that thing where it's like so bleak that if you read it, you'll just
that's an alien
let
experience
it all out.
to me. When I'm in a bad mood, I like to feel happier. That must be a...
Yeah, I mean, personally, yeah, I watch comedy when I need, cheering up.
Forgetting Sarah Marshall, that's my go-to film when I'm in a bad mood.
Mine's normally Disney.
Yeah, but then you can't watch any of the more recent ones because they're even more upsetting.
Yeah, I mean, I refuse to watch Frozen again. It got on my nerves. Sorry, listeners, but it was tragic.
That song is terrible. Could all radio stations please stop playing it every 5 minutes? And to all the local radio stations, I don't want to hear random children singing the chorus at random times.
Yeah, they did that a lot over Christmas, actually.
They did. They loved doing that, didn't they?
Yeah, we're not having that on the show.
No, we won't be. Actually, we could throw it in later on.
I don't mind someone performing a poem. That's totally okay with me.
That's a nice idea. We'll have to do that at some point.
But yeah, what else was on the list? That was the two?
Yes. So those were the two from the two that were mentioned. There's also, in British prisons, a lot of Jeffrey Archer. Well, I say a lot of Jeffrey Archer. He wrote a diary from prison. I think it was unimaginatively called The Prison Diaries. Archer, sort your titles out, because that is terrible, frankly. Strangely enough, which I was a bit worried about this, they read a lot of crime fiction, ironically. So maybe it's a hindsight sort of, how could I have got away with this sort of thing?
Yeah.
That would be an excellent...
All right, if I, that
would be an excellent...
Reoffend.
That would be an excellent section for books I wish I'd read. One book I wish I'd read before I got caught for the crime that I committed.
It's so true. That's really bizarre.
Yeah, a lot of Martina Cole. And even more worryingly than in crime fiction is true crime. Apparently the Cray twins and things like that are quite... Books on the Cray twins.
I wonder whether it's just a case of you just wanting to identify with what you read.
Yeah.
Because you do.
I can understand. I can definitely understand the prison, because you would need help getting through a situation like prison. I would imagine, and books can definitely give you that. And there are some guides that were specifically on how to survive prison, basically, with some of the books, especially in American prisons, because I'm sure they have a far tougher system than we do here.
Yeah.
But you can imagine that would be something that you go to. Interestingly enough, there's one book. I think it was the most popular in American prisons. It's called 48 Laws of Power. Which is a Machiavellian self-help book. It teaches you how to... No, I always like using the word Machiavellian, by the way. There is a smile on my face every time I say it. Which is how, one of those kind of motivational self-help things, but it teaches you to not be very nice, basically. It teaches you sort of to hide your intentions from people and how to manipulate people through lying. 48 Laws of Power, probably quite good for journalism, I would imagine.
How to deceive people.
Or just watch the thick of it. That tends to be my advice on how to be a terrible person. But that one is banned in British prisons, interestingly enough.
Oh, see, I wouldn't mind getting a list of books that are banned.
Yeah, there are. I didn't find any other ones, but there are a good few. And there was they were speaking to someone who said there isn't any point because they'll just read them when they get out. What difference does it really make if they, prison?
Yeah.
I suppose if they have a longer sentence, but then what can they do in prison with the knowledge that they gain from a book?
I don't know. I wonder whether it's just a case of it is the idea of when you're there, you're supposed to be, I don't know, being punished, but also understanding what you've done and going through that whole self-evaluation process, and so they don't want you to.
I think it was
be
strange
tainted.
to refer to books as a privilege as well, because that was how they were referred to before. But now, of course, I consider books to be a privilege. But then when you actually think about what that means, you think you have to earn the right to read books. But then books are. Let's get a bit over dramatic here. This will be on some Facebook post one day when I'm long gone.
With
books,
your quote
books
name at the bottom.
That's
the
it.
ones that everyone posts on Instagram.
Books are a right rather than a privilege. There you go. That's my quote of my life.
No, I completely agree.
You better tweet that one now.
It's in the same way that people who can't read because they've not had the money to be taught in some countries, and
Exactly.
I just think that's just so unfair to not be able to read because you haven't been able to afford education. It's incredibly harsh. But this decision has had some backing from quite a lot of groups, like Philip Pullman, Caroline Duffy. Obviously, all of their supporters naturally agreed, and lots of campaign groups as well. So it has come round pretty quickly.
There was
decided pretty quickly as well.
What were they called? It's the Howard League for Penal Reform is one of the main campaigners, I think.
Yeah.
And they had a campaign over Christmas to give books to prisoners. It was kind of a charity-run thing where they would get people to donate books and donate money, so they could deliver a lot of books to prisoners, which I thought was a lovely idea.
Yeah.
As long as you keep the selected books, because you don't want to be wasting money on banned books.
Yeah, I completely
But
agree.
there's no nationwide ban on any books. It's only the specific governor for each prison would decide which was banned. So there's no sort of comprehensive list of everything that you can't read in prison. It is completely up to the sort of the discretion of the owners, or the owners of the prison.
But like what we were talking
leaders.
about last week with the head teachers deciding what people read in school.
What they what they consider to be inappropriate.
Yeah.
It's a similar situation to that, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, they're all the same. Moving on to our next topic, which is one that naturally we were going to talk about when talking about books, is film adaptations of novels. What did you go for? Because I went for an obvious choice.
I've got a lot here, actually.
Have you? I've got the one, and obviously it's Lord of the Rings.
It would have to be.
It would be, and it is for one simple reason that I actually prefer. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I prefer.
Ooh, shots fired in this one.
No, actually, that's not true. I think the film tells the story, and it has its own right to. Whereas with most things, they're just really rubbish version.
Definitely.
But they just stand alone. To me, they're not really the same thing. I read the books and think entirely different things, and I still see it the way I see it in my head, rather than seeing the characters, apart from Aragorn, who I do love. Therefore, I'm happy to see him in my head when I'm reading as well.
And above your bed. Because you have a
Yeah,
giant poster of his
just
face.
To clarify for everybody who's listening, I have a poster of him in my room, and it's nothing too crazy.
No, he's not that naked.
No, just sadly not. So yeah, what was your? I'm guessing you've got a list.
I've got a list. I did film studies as undergrad, so this is kind of a combination of two things that I could talk about for the rest of my life probably. But there's a lot of them that I've got written down here. I've got from the most recent example that I can think of that I really kind of felt passionately about was The Great Gatsby, the Baz Luhrmann film. Yeah.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I liked parts of it, and there's one part of it that I didn't like so much that it ruined the film for me.
What part?
I hate Tobey Maguire.
Oh no,
really,
not me as well.
really
There seems
hate
to be
him.
my general feeling I get from people is that they don't really like him that much.
Well, I have no problem. He's a bit of a weird actor. He's a bit kind of quirky, and I don't think he can move his limbs in the way that a
A bit
normal
Keanu
person.
Reeves-ish.
Yeah, I feel like his joints might be on backwards, and he's had to relearn to use them at some point. But
How can that be true? He was Spider-Man, and that was seriously flexible.
you bring up the exact reason that I have such burning hatred for Tobey Maguire. He is, along with Sam Raimi, even though I like Sam Raimi because he made The Evil Dead and that's a classic, but those films are... That is an adaptation as well, so we can bring that in because
That's
it's
true,
a comic
it is.
book
I was just thinking
adaptation. Pure hatred for those films. They are the worst 3 films ever to have been made. They absolutely destroyed the best superhero that there is. Tobey Maguire is not Peter Parker in any way. That bit when he gets an emo fringe in the 3rd film and starts dancing down the street is absolutely atrocious.
But you're thinking of... I mean, this is the issue. If you've never read the comics, you won't think it's terrible. I mean, it's almost ignorance is bliss, because I enjoy the films very much, and I've never read... My brother has read quite a lot of them. My family has read them, especially when they do terrible things. I was just going to say that... I was going to say a part of the comics, and then I realised that if people are listening, then I'd be giving it away, so I'll just
no
backtrack
spoilers.
on that. Yeah.
The one rule that we have here at Penny Dreadfuls is no spoilers.
So I'm not going to say anything. But yeah, I haven't read them, so it's almost...
Okay,
that's the bar that you set when you read a book.
Of course, all these things are subjective. I will give you that. But objectively, the 3rd bit when he gets an emo fringe and starts dancing down the street, objectively, that's terrible. I'm not asking
I do
you.
See that.
I'm telling you this bit. But yeah, I hate this film. So I hate Tobey Maguire based on that reason. Andrew Garfield is Spider-Man, as far as I'm concerned. He is Peter Parker, and he's far more handsome.
I'd agree with that.
But I think, going back to The Great Gatsby, the actual point that we had, because we are kind of open to tangents here, aren't we? The Great Gatsby, Leo DiCaprio was absolutely spectacular. You can't knock that. He is Jay Gatsby down to a T. There is no one else that could ever have played him. Yeah, and Carey Mulligan is spectacular as well. She's absolutely gorgeous, and it was good, but it was okay. I'll go as far as to say for The Great Gatsby, but it shouldn't have been made, I would say.
I agree. There's a sense that what I find so incredible about the book is it's so intricately written, and there's so much detail to not just the exchanges between the people, but the little expressions that they have, and the way a room looks, the way a person looks at another person. And I mean, actors are fantastic and they can pick up on those small details, but the fact is I felt that was sort of lost in the film.
Completely.
And they really did try and make it as all fun and dancing and glorious as the book, but it just... I don't know whether we're just desensitized to what we see rather than what we read, but it just didn't come across as glamorous as it does, or as beautiful as the book.
I hate the 3D as well. I'm not a fan of 3D anyway. There are some circumstances when I can abide it, I suppose, in certain films when they're quite big and spectacular. Like Guardians of the Galaxy did 3D really well. But for The Great Gatsby, why would you... One of the great American novel, if you're going to discount Mark Twain, as I know that you do.
Of course. Terrible book.
But why would you put that in 3D? That doesn't make any sense. I know Baz Luhrmann has this obsession with kind of intentionally making things sickly. Like if you look at Romeo and Juliet, it was quite sickly, but he did that far nicer than he did this one. But the bits when the words are coming out of the screen when he's writing the book, The Great Gatsby, I just thought, no, this is terrible. This shouldn't have been done like this.
I just think that, Fitzgerald just writes in the most elegant way. And I think when you try and put that on a screen, either it's going to be elegant or it's going to be slightly on the cheesy side.
Yeah, it was definitely on the cheesy
side.
side.
It was a bit like that. So I did enjoy it, and but I had mixed reactions from everybody. Some people thought it was fantastic. Other people thought it was great because they hadn't read the book. Most people who had read the book weren't huge fans, because I personally liked the book for a different reason to not just the plot.
Yeah.
So
yeah, he turns a nice phrase, Fitzgerald. He does describe something beautifully. I think that the middle bit was really nice when Jay Gatsby and what's her name? My mind's gone completely blank.
Daisy.
When they first meet again in the room with the flowers, there's a nice little middle bit there, maybe a half an hour period. It is really lovely, and I thought that quite nicely reached the kind of scope of the way the book felt at the time. But I think apart from that, yeah, it completely missed the point, really.
Yeah, it's a bit sad. But I did read something interesting, going back to Lord of the Rings, which I do actually think is strange. They changed a lot of how much some of the characters were featured, which obviously, depending on the book, they're going to do that a lot so that certain people get more screen action. But apparently they gave the women in Lord of the Rings more of a role so that females can have more screen time.
Okay, that does make sense, I guess.
Which is really, really bizarre because it's not something I'd ever thought of.
There's not...
I'd never thought it's a really manly book and there's only going to be men.
There's not many girls in the film as it is, really. There's not much screen time for girls. So to think that they increased that screen time does make you think that there must have been, in the book, there must have been barely any time at all for girls.
And I didn't notice that at all. And obviously, everyone gets angry when you omit characters from the film, which they did, especially in the first one. They didn't have Tom Bombadil, and so you had essentially over chapters missing. But I still think it's a fantastic film.
I have to confess I haven't read The Lord of the Rings.
Have you not?
No, I've read...
I don't punish people for saying that. Yeah, no. Everyone else, if it's any other book, then yeah, I do. But
for Lord of the Rings, I've read The Hobbit and The Silmarillion.
So there's two better ones, I'd say. So I read Lord of the Rings, and it was it is quite taxing. When you get into it, then you start reading very quickly. And you go from like the end of the first book straight into the second and into the third. But it comes and goes. So then if you find a chapter which is not particularly exciting, so in the book there's, lengthy part where they're in the Council of Elrond and they're talking about what's happening, what's going on. And I just couldn't bring myself to read any further. And then I didn't read the book for another 2 weeks. So it is one of those going and out of, but then obviously I'm going to be disagreed with because people love the book. So
it is definitely on my list of books to read. But I find that Tolkien wrote this universe and he had such a clear idea of the universe, rather than kind of trying to write a universe and having it in, maybe on paper in front of him. He had it in his head in terms of he knew every single detail.
Definitely, and it created his own language.
Yeah, he wrote a language. The Silmarillion is the Bible of Middle Earth as well. It is the most complex book, and there's so many people. It's such a difficult read, but it just shows that he knew exactly what was going on in this world, and he had such a clear plan for it, and I think it makes it so convincing. And it comes out through all of the books. I think they're all so...
Plus, he had such a clear idea of the history, so it really was as if it's real life, where you have things that are happening now that really are affected by things that happened thousands of years ago, and you just can't really get that across on screen. I still thought the films were great, but you can't get that depth in the film.
I've heard people say exactly the same thing about Lord of the Rings. Not Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. I'm not a Harry Potter fan.
I
myself.
Agree. I hate the films.
The films are terrible. I think maybe one of them is okay, passable as a film.
Actually, no, I lie. I don't hate them, but they're just so childish, and I feel that they just take away all the sophistication of what's actually happening.
Yeah, and they don't give the sense of an entire world where this thing exists. It's more of just a narrative where it kind of pops in and out where it feels like it, sort of thing.
Exactly. So when you read the books, you can extract little details yourself, which are so intricate. You just think, oh my, she must have thought of that months before she even wrote this book because it fits with that bit in that book. But in the film, it just doesn't come across at all, and I hate that. I spend most of my time trying to convince people that it's as much an adult's book as children's, but
it makes me wish that I'd read the books when I was younger, actually, because now I feel like it's been tainted by the films and that you couldn't, because I struggle to watch Daniel Radcliffe in anything else now. Not true of Emma Watson. I could watch her in anything, whatever she's wearing, whatever she's doing. I love her.
I'm sure you could.
But Daniel Radcliffe, I can't see him in anything else without thinking, because when he was on, I think it was Jimmy Fallon, wasn't it, when he was doing when he was rapping, I thought, no, Harry, stop it, this is ridiculous.
I thought it was quite good.
That doesn't suit you.
But it's hard to shake that off.
So I think that to go back and read the books now would be one of those situations where it would be in your mind the whole time. You wouldn't be able to imagine them as anyone else.
I'm so glad I read them before because we have this topic discussion all the time about film adaptations, and I always get asked, do I still see things the way I saw them after I watch the film? Do I then just see Harry, Ron and Hermione as Rupert Grint, Emma and Daniel? And I always say no, because I don't. But I'm lucky because my friend said to me, I'm so jealous because all the scenes, she now just sees the film when she reads the book, and I said I don't at all. I have a clear idea of what I can see so much I could draw it out, and it doesn't look a lot like the film.
Yeah,
that's a part. It's my own imagination, so I see it how I see it.
That's interesting that you say that, actually, because I saw a few years ago the film adaptation of Dorian Gray. I don't know if you saw it.
I've seen it. Oh no, well I saw half. Is it one that's really dark and creepy?
Yeah, and it's
I
Colin Firth is I can't remember the guy's name, the bad guy who convinces Dorian to be immoral, basically.
Henry Wotton?
Yeah, I think that's him, yeah. And I saw that before I read the book, actually, just completely by coincidence. It was on TV, and I think I was just sat down and watched it. It's terrible. It's a terrible film. And they changed the ending completely. But what I did enjoy about that was that because the film wasn't very good, when I went back and read the book, I didn't equate it with the film at all. They were completely separate, which was quite nice. So I didn't imagine Dorian looking like the actor, which can, like you say, can be a problem for some people reading Harry Potter and then watching the films. But I didn't find that, which I guess it goes to show how well the book was written and how bad the film was. It would show both of those things.
In some ways it just does depend on how much you liked the book as well. If you didn't like the book, you might prefer the film.
Yeah, and if you like both, then maybe you'll be a bit more confused about it.
What else did you have on your list? Yeah, I just had Lord of the Rings, as I said. So
there's an absolutely brilliant film from the 90s starring Nicolas Cage, which is a large part of the reason why it's so good.
I know what you're going to say. Is it One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
No.
Really?
No, that is a good film though, but I've never read the book.
Have you not?
No, Casey's good though. Adaptation is called, and this is it's one of the strangest films you could ever see if you watch it. And it's about Charlie Kaufman, who's a screenwriter. He's written some weird films. I think he wrote Being John Malkovich. He's written some very strange films, and he was commissioned in real life. This screenwriter was commissioned to write an adaptation of The Orchid Thief, which is a non-fiction book, and he had writer's block. He couldn't do it. I'm not sure what it was, but he just couldn't write the book. So what he did was he tore up the script as far as he got with it in writing this non-fiction book into a film, and what he then wrote was a film about him writing the adaptation of the book.
Yeah, I follow.
And it's the most surreal film you could ever see.
It's a lot of layers.
He invented a twin brother for himself as a plot device to then drive on him writing the story. And it's kind of like a really interesting commentary on how films have to progress in terms of something has to happen. And if you're writing something where nothing happens, then you can't really write it. So he had to invented a twin brother. And Charlie Kaufman plays himself in the film. Well, no, Nicolas Cage played Charlie Kaufman, but he's played as he was trying to write the book, but with a completely Hollywood twist.
Just realised you said Nicolas Cage, and I was thinking of Jack Nicholson earlier. So let's just rewind. But anyway,
we'll scratch that. We'll edit that. But Jack Nicholson is good, but he's not Nicolas Cage, is he?
Nicolas Cage is terrible.
He's a great actor. I can't believe you'd say that.
I don't know.
I also have, The Shining is always a great one as well.
I haven't read that book.
Have you not read it? Have you seen the film?
I have seen most of the film.
Another Jack Nicholson. I thought that one was interesting because Stephen King hated it, completely disowned it, absolutely despised it. And I think that's a shame because I was always a big Stephen King fan when I was younger. That was a lot of the stuff that I used to read. I used to go through his kind of back catalogue and just buy whatever was there. And I'm a massive Stanley Kubrick fan as well. That's maybe only more so in the most recent years, so I find that quite strange. But then Kubrick changed the film so much. The ending is completely different. It's a completely different story, essentially.
See, I don't think I could handle that as an author, but I wonder to what extent you're willing to let it go when you hand it over. Because it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen Saving Mr. Banks.
No.
And it's about how Disney made Mary Poppins and how the writer she kept basically intruding into the whole procedure, saying this is not how they're doing this and this is not how this should look. And I think that's what I'd be like,
Yeah.
Like, this is
I suppose you have to be careful when you're selling your thing because you need to be sure of the terms. But then I think it's also, I watched a brilliant talk with George R.R. Martin at Google, and he was talking about the TV show of Game of Thrones, and he was talking about how it came about. And the producers and the screenwriters are massive fans of the book, which I think makes a huge difference. If you look at Peter Jackson and Lord of the Rings, he is absolutely obsessed with it. And so that makes them be more more faithful to the original text. And the only time they'll change it is if they're forced to.
And I think as well, it works both ways. Sometimes you really can have that thing where you've watched a film and it's so compelling or terrible, could be, that you think, I need to read the book. So a lot of people have watched Game of Thrones and have now read the book from watching it.
Yeah, exactly the same situation came to me when I first encountered Hunter Thompson. The first thing I ever saw was the Rum Diaries, which is not a very good film. It's based on Hunter's unpublished novel, and I don't think the novel is that great itself, because obviously he wasn't first and foremost a novelist as much as he wanted to be. But I just watched the Rum Diary with Johnny Depp, and it wasn't a great film really, but it intrigued me enough to then go and read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and then I watched Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, the movie, and then that was where I came into contact with Hunter, and then I'm completely obsessed with him now. But I think it's an interesting point that sometimes something can be bad enough to intrigue you to actually go and try and find out about it.
Yeah, I do think that's possible.
There's a definite divide as well between an adaptation and filming a book, I would say. Because I think there's some things where they're literally like-for-like recreations. Every page is a scene in the book sort of thing, they don't change anything.
So yeah, I was fine with BBC adaptations in particular. They are very good to staying on point. So like last week when we were discussing about why I might like Jane Austen. But so many of the adaptations on the BBC are just exactly how it happens.
Yeah.
And because a lot of the time they don't change the direct speech between two characters, so although you might miss some of the side narration, the direct dialogue is exactly the same. It's almost word for word, so you don't lose that, whereas sometimes you do.
Sometimes they'll change it completely, especially for a modern audience as well. Sometimes they will have to change things so the meaning can get across. But Heart of Darkness is another good example. But that's an example of one that
I hated that book.
Yeah, I know you hate it. I absolutely loved it.
It actually upset me.
Conrad's a genius. I still maintain Conrad's a genius. You should read Nostromo. That one's brilliant.
Maybe I'll give it another shot.
But it's only 96 pages, Heart of Darkness. You can't complain about that, can you?
Oh, I can, believe me. I did in my class.
It took me about 2 weeks to get through it, even though it's only 96 pages. Because
it's the most dense thing I've ever written.
So dense. But that was adapted into Apocalypse Now by Francis Ford Coppola. And then when you kind of take them next to each other...
I watched that film.
It's brilliant.
Oh, I didn't put the two together.
Yeah, I know. That's what I thought. The only reason I know that is because it just says it on the back of the DVD. It says based on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. But I thought that was a brilliant way of doing it because he takes a similar storyline but then completely quite literally is an adaptation because he changes it to tell the message that he wants it to tell. And I think that's a really good way of doing a book. Because Dorian Gray had exactly the same story the whole way through and then they changed the ending.
Yeah, that's so frustrating.
But then
I'd feel so misled.
Yeah, I was completely confused because I thought this is such a boring ending. Why have they done this? But watching Apocalypse Now, because he took it so far away from the book, and because it was quite far removed anyway, because Conrad was writing 1900s. So I think that it was an absolutely brilliant way of doing it, to completely remove it from each other, so that you're telling a different story, but then kind of keeping this, because Kurtz still appears in the film, and is still a very similar character. There's direct quotes from it, but it's not the same. It's not the same at all because it's obviously Vietnam War as opposed to.
And you hate a film less if they do that.
Yeah.
Because they've made a clear divide.
Exactly.
So you can, there's a bit more peace there between readers and watchers. Moving on swiftly to our next topic, which is, as Alex called it, trash novels.
Okay.
We know what he thinks of them.
I'm going to already... I mean it as a genre as opposed to a criticism of the...
Yeah, I guess it could be bestsellers in some people's eyes. You never know.
Yeah, I suppose they're money makers, people that can actually make a living from writing.
Yeah, exactly. And I said, well, actually, no, they're holiday novels. The books that you pack.
Don't be like that.
Blissful.
Don't be like that. I know we said we weren't going to be highbrow here, but come on.
They are holiday novels.
Yeah.
I don't tend to. I'm going to be completely highbrow here and say it is really rare that I read a book that comes under that genre, just because there's so much literature I've got left to read.
Except Jane Austen.
That is not trash. So not trash.
That probably annoyed a lot of people with that one.
But it's just, I mean, in the same way that if someone asked me about contemporary literature, because I still am going back to what I've read at university and thinking, I never got to read that. I'm still going through those. So actually, I don't read as much contemporary lit as I should. And also I find a lot of it is just, Robbie Williams' autobiography, and
I've got that written down here actually.
Yeah, and it's just, I appreciate if that's where people get the thrills from, but it's not for me.
There's something nice about an autobiography that is truthfully written and is written by the person that it says it's written by. But then there's ghost-written novels by people that haven't done anything, couldn't really have had that much of an interest in life, could they? I suppose it's nice escapism, though. I think that some people must have written autobiographies and you think, what have you done? What have you done to be telling me about?
It's things like, and I hope that there isn't one out there, but I'm guessing there is, something about One Direction's rise to fame, and I just think, do you know what? I've seen it because it's only in the last.
Yeah, it happened like 5 minutes ago.
You're all 11, so
yeah.
What are you going to tell me about?
I'm not going to hear you say a bad word about One Direction. They're up there. They're up there with my passion.
I have sang along to their songs.
They're up there with my passion for Taylor Swift.
Oh God! But I'm talking about this in a book sense. But so obviously I've got the usual suspects: Dan Brown's thrillers, which I know you said you didn't like.
I hate Dan Brown. Actually, no, I hate Dan Brown. But I hate him. I hate more than one of his books at a time, if you see what I mean. So I like one of his books, but then if you take another one of his books as well, then I hate him. Because my problem with him is...
Okay. I do sort of understand what you're saying.
Other than being terrible midlife crisis, I'm really sad. So I'm going to write this book and make myself feel better because I'm sleeping with 20-year-olds and solving international mysteries and all this sort of thing. I'm okay with that. I can deal with it. We will have midlife crisis.
I was going to say, you definitely would not turn that down.
But, no, of course not. But I read Angels and Demons first, actually. Really enjoyed it.
So did I,
Yeah,
actually.
really enjoyed it. Quite an interesting, exciting book. And then I started reading the Da Vinci Code afterwards because that's the one that everyone was talking about. And that's why I read Angels and Demons. But it was terrible. It started exactly the same. And then what was it? I think they both start with a murder in a museum. And then a young girl who is different in both of them that he then sleeps with.
I just find it weird with any trash novel that there's this whole thing about, and someone said to me, have you read One Day? And I said, no, I've not read it. And they said, okay, it's not really your kind of book, and you said you don't like it. But read it, because you'll get through it quite fast. And I
That's
did.
never a good sign.
I
When someone says you can get through it quite fast.
And so I read it after all of my third year undergrad exams had finished, and I did not want to look at literature for, I thought, maybe years after. And I read it, and actually really liked it, and I felt really upset by it as well, because
you wished you didn't like it.
And I thought, why do? But actually, there is that sense that sometimes you do want to just read something that doesn't require much thought. But I have to admit, it is very rare, and is even if I am on holiday, I do not want to be reading something that's essentially rubbish.
Yeah, that feels like a bit of a waste of time when you get to the end of it.
And so I don't think, as far as trash novels go, that's actually that rubbish.
I've seen the film.
Yeah, but that is rubbish because Anne Hathaway's Yorkshire accent is terrible.
Yeah, I'll give you that, actually. Yeah.
But the book is actually really not as bad as I thought. But it did sort of give me an idea of what people mean when they say it's not highbrow literature, but it is. You just read it and you're sort of gone. And that's what it did feel like. Which is an art of its own, I guess.
I used to read a lot of these sort of books, especially the male-focused ones. What I always think of, whenever I'm thinking about these sort of trashy books, I'm thinking of W.H. Smith's in an airport. That's always what I think of.
With really glitzy covers that you just know are going to be rubbish.
And they're always called, I remember reading one called Rage, and I don't know what it was about at all. It was something.
Did it make you angry?
No, he got angry in it
even worse.
and killed a bunch of people or something like that. But it was one of those typically aimed at men, like I said, midlife crisis. This is really exciting. This is what your life could be like if you were a spy and that sort of
They
thing.
really revert to. Do you find this? They really revert to stereotypes when they
Completely,
with those,
yeah.
which actually kind of makes me think maybe that's what people want. They're the best sellers, the ones that are obviously targeted at women. 50 Shades of Grey, and
Great
ones
book.
yeah.
I've never read it. I've
I
never read
read
it.
3/4 of the first one, and genuinely, I remember not reading it the next day because I literally fell asleep. It was not great.
Yeah, see, I've never heard anyone say that they liked it. 50
Because
Shades.
and I don't think it's a people not admitting it. I bet those people genuinely don't like it. It's just written so badly.
That's exactly what I've heard.
I can't make myself turn another page because it's so dull. And I think maybe people like it because there is some obviously explicit content there. But and I think because TV has that already, you get some gritty TV programs.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether you get that grit in contemporary literature like that.
Well, I quite enjoyed the French kind of criticism of it, was that it wasn't kinky enough.
Oh,
It just wasn't very
It's
good.
really not, though. I don't know everyone's fascination with it. I mean, I read it. It's so repetitive. You can't possibly think that's exciting. It's just
His
the
name
same
as well.
old.
There's something that I object to his name. I don't know what it is. What's his name? Christian Grey, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something about the name Christian Grey that it's like it's not very
Is that
imaginative.
his name? I can't remember.
It's not very imaginative. It just seems like exactly what you would call a guy that's
Yeah.
supposedly
I suppose that's the whole thing about him not coming across as crazy as he is about
Very-
chains and things.
very repeated fact, but it was Twilight fan fiction apparently, wasn't it? The first that it was written as Twilight fan fiction.
What?
Did you not hear that? That's what
No.
I heard. Yeah, she.
I knew that it was an ebook first,
Yeah.
and then it did so well.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And there's also 50 Shades of Grey, which was a spin-off from that. Do you hear
Yeah,
about that one? Yeah,
I do know about
Apparently
that.
that
That
one.
pleases me more.
yeah. I quite like Sheds.
Yeah, sheds make me happy. Yeah, I mean, that's all I've got to say on the topic, really. I just think that there's... maybe I'm still in that frame of mind where I want to read... Or maybe there's a space for both. I think maybe you can read... At the moment, I'm reading Oscar Wilde. Maybe you can read Oscar Wilde and then read Katie Price's biography, and it's totally
That's a
okay.
good book. That's a good book.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's got great pictures.
Yeah, I'm sure. There's some lovely shots from her younger days. I'm not one to be highbrow about anything generally, I suppose, except books. I kind of am about that. But I love, like, film-wise, I love trash. Honestly,
So do I,
my favourite
actually.
films are 80s action films like Commando, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Greatest film of all time, you'll love this actually, greatest film of all time is Demolition Man. Have you ever seen it?
I know of it.
It is. This is spectacular. Wesley Snipes, Sylvester Stallone, and Sandra Bullock. Right? Honestly, the trifecta of a perfect movie lineup. And it is based on Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. And that just
Need to
makes
watch
it
that.
so much better. But I love trash in terms of films. I absolutely adore it. Even TV. To be fair, TV, I'm not.
I
I've never-
agree. This is what I do. I mean, I watch Made in Chelsea, and people look at me with disgust, as if they just can't believe I'd do such a thing. And I even pre-record it so I don't miss it.
to make sure that you have it on lock.
But, and I have no shame in admitting that at all. But I just can't do the same with books. I don't know why.
See, what I find, this might not be the same for you because you studied lit, so you probably read at a completely different pace to me, but what I find is that it's such a commitment. A book is a huge commitment.
No, you're absolutely right. You can flick over with it. But I think you've said the same. I can't not finish a book because it feels wrong.
Yes, yeah.
So I plough through a terrible book miserably.
Exactly what I do. I think there's probably 2 or 3 books that I've ever given up on. And they wouldn't be short. If I was going to give up on it, it would have to be really long. Because if it's a couple of 100 pages, you can just drag your way through it. But It by Stephen King, I got a couple of 100 pages into that, and it was the most boring book I've ever read. And it's 1,500 pages. And if you're not reading at a pace, that's a long time's worth of reading. And that's the thing, is that if on busy days, it can take me a good couple of weeks to get through a book, even if it's not that big. So I think if I'm going to take that much time and then get to the end of it and think that was rubbish, you can't spend that much time, can you?
Especially when there's so many good books out there.
Exactly, that's exactly it. Because I tend to buy kind of things that are classics and things that are cult books that have got quite a following. And I never will pick up a book off the shelf and just read it. if you know what I mean. I'll never go
Yeah,
into
I
Waterstones.
can't
If I've
think
never
I've ever
heard of
done
it,
that.
if I've never heard of it, I won't buy it.
I mean, that's why I've started listening to more kind of radio shows related to books, because I keep thinking, oh, I am actually missing out in some ways because I
Yeah.
don't listen to what is going on in the world of books at the moment, because you're so wrapped up in what you study.
There has to
That
be
you-
quality contemporary books as well. It doesn't feel like it. It never feels like there's anything new and good out at any one time. I think the oldest book that I
The
can
last
read
time
is
I
the
thought
90s.
that was reading Julian Barnes' book, and that was some time ago. Maybe 3 years or so.
Yeah, see, I
And
had...
that was, it came out, I went to his signing, I got it signed, and then read it. I thought it was incredible, fits in with literature over time, and then that was the last book I felt that about.
Yeah, see, I read a lot of contemporary non-fiction, because I suppose with non-fiction it needs to be more up to date, doesn't it? It needs to be in the last couple of years, otherwise it's probably going to be irrelevant generally. So I read Hack Attack, Nick Davis, because that was quite, events
Suited
that occurred
to
over,
us.
yeah, suited to journalism students, and happened in 2011. The Spirit Level, which is a little bit too scientific for me. I would have preferred just the argument as opposed to the data, but then you needed data for the credibility. And I'm reading Owen Jones at the moment, The Establishment. So I'm quite good with contemporary non-fiction, but fiction, probably the most recent thing I'll read is maybe at the a push one or two from the 90s, generally pre-70s.
Kind of, yeah, see, I'm starting to worry. It's getting all deep here, but is it to do with this whole... Nowadays, everybody reads things in short bites. Twitter, you get your news online really quickly, you eat on the go. Is it this whole thing about you just read a quick and easy book and you get your satisfaction from it, and that's fine? Which I could actually probably see happening. But then hopefully there's always going to be an appreciation of another genre which is a bit more challenging.
People have tried to turn books into a commodity as well. I think they've tried to turn it into a business. And I've sort of read guides on writing, and a lot of them say you need target audience, all this sort of thing. And I think I don't like that. Maybe it's too old school. Maybe you can't just write something and people will like it. But I think when you're writing for a particular person, you're not going to tell them anything that they don't already know. And it just seems like there will be no point in writing a book for a
it just seems a
particular
lot
person.
more like marketing and business, doesn't it? But I guess it is for authors who are doing it for a living, whereas we're probably doing it on the side one day. So
Hopefully one day, if there's any
as well as our
publishers-
millionaire job.
of presenting this radio show, which I'm sure is going to go national any day now. This is only episode 2, but I've got high hopes.
I completely agree. Just in the last couple of minutes now, just our usual feature, the one book I'd wish I'd read before. This week is one book I'd wish I'd read before my first relationship.
We've just turned into a late night Radio 1 show where we're going to help you with your relationship problems.
Yeah, I definitely am not, because I'm basically criticising mine. So
I'm terrible at relationships, so it wouldn't come anywhere near me.
But we'll go with yours first, Alex.
Twilight I went for.
Twilight.
Yeah. Do you know, I find myself often torn between two mythical creatures. Do you not? I find that this really helped.
Always.
I was kind of
Always.
taught. I'm quite a big fan of dragons, but then at the same time, I also quite like the Minotaur, and I thought, which am I going to enter into?
I mean, mine's like Aragorn, who obviously isn't quite human, is he? He's a half elf, and then I've got Mr. Tumnus.
Also in a relationship with his cousin Aragorn.
Don't ruin it for me.
16 times removed.
Just don't. Okay, why Twilight? Out of all of the books,
Because it's an absolute classic. The second one. I'm thinking the second one, which has
I
got
haven't
shoes.
read Twilight.
Neither have I. I've seen the film. But no, I'm completely joking. Twilight is not. Choosing mythical beasts is not a problem that I am willing to share on this radio show. I went for Great Expectations. Because I have always had a bit of a crush on Estella. She wasn't very nice, but then I think that made me fancy her more. What did you go for?
Harry Potter, for the strangest reason. I obviously did read it before my first proper relationship, but I remember lending the books to my dad and saying to him, read these, they're great. And he read up to The Goblet of Fire, the fourth one.
No, it's quite a long way. I never even got through the first one.
What? But they're the not as good ones. You need to get past that point.
Yeah.
They start getting good, like 4 onwards. And he read it and he said, oh, it's just such a shame that Ron and Hermione are not just getting together. And I was 14 at the time, maybe. And I sort of looked at my dad and I was like, no, Dad, what are you on about Ron and Hermione? And he said, yes, they're supposed to be together because look, he's getting annoyed at her when she asks somebody else out on a date. And I said to him, no, it's Harry and Hermione. Because when you're 14, that's the way it goes. You have, Harry is obviously the main male character and Hermione is one of the main female characters. So you just, as a 14-year-old, I just put the two together and I was like, obviously it's them two.
I can see that. I kind of, from watching the first couple of films, that's the way you imagine it's going to go eventually.
Exactly. And I completely missed that detail, and that sort of just reminds me of what I used to be like in former younger relationships, where you just miss the point of absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And you're just
I quite
wow.
miss that. I miss missing the point.
Yeah, yeah. At
least you're innocent.
And then I went through the phase of, going the complete other way, where it's like you read far too much into things. And being 24 is great because now you just have a balance. You just don't have that anymore. But yeah, I mean, I didn't see it. And the whole time, obviously, there's a whole thing about they were friends. So you should have almost seen that they were more than friends. And I'm rubbish at telling that as well.
Yeah, I think the Ginny thing was weird. I was a bit like, what? Where did that even come from?
It's not weird.
It is weird. I was
Your
a bit
friend's
like,
sibling, that happens quite a lot.
That does happen a lot, actually. But I thought in that particular case, it was a bit like, she's not even a character. I didn't even know who she was. When they were like, oh, they got together, I was like, who is that? I absolutely have no idea. But
also, the idea that she really wasn't mentioned all that much. And then suddenly, by the 5th book, she was this girl who was incredibly popular. And there's quite a few mentions in the book about her, having a lot of guys liking her. And I was thinking, when? when did this happen?
Yeah.
Is that what happens to girls when they go through puberty? All of a sudden, it's like lots of males? I don't know.
They just all of a sudden hit you, yeah.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere.
So Great Expectations was because you liked...
Yeah, I think that it was... Because Pip's he's a bit keen. He's a bit keen, isn't he, really? I was reading the book and I thought he's going through the whole thing that he's going through, isn't he? Essentially trying to become a gentleman in order to impress her, and she's kind of leading him on but kind of acting like she likes him, and the whole time I think it was a great relationship. I think you're kind of reading it and you think, you have no idea what's going to happen. And I think it ended happily in the end. Because there's a couple of different endings. There was an ending, and then there was an alternate ending that Dickens wrote for it. And I think I read the happy version.
I've not read it.
You've not? Oh, that is disgusting.
I know. It's on my list. That's why I don't read contemporary novels, because I haven't read these.
There's too many old books.
Was it 2, maybe 3 Christmases ago? There was a 3-part or 2-part
there was also a film as well, wasn't there?
With a really handsome guy playing Pip, and then I looked him up, and he was actually a model for a big designer company, which explained a lot. But
I never imagined Pip as a model.
Yeah.
But I think it ended happily in the end in the version that I read. But there's a couple of different versions, so I really couldn't be sure on that. But I think it was a real kind of truthful way of looking at it, especially because I was 15 when I had my first relationship that I count as a relationship, and I was too nice. I'm horrible now, but then I was quite nice.
Yeah, it's such a shame. We've only ever seen the horrid side of you.
Yeah, the other guy's not coming back. I hated that guy.
No, I completely agree. And there's great things in Harry Potter as well about... I think there's always the idea that people waste a lot of time. I mean, I've got so many examples of friends who either like their boyfriend or don't. And there's a lot of time wasting going on.
Yeah.
In the sense that they're like, should I break up with them? Shouldn't I? Or should I ask them out? Shouldn't I? And I just think, really? I mean, it totally seems legitimate until you get to the 9-month phase where I'm thinking... this is too long. You can't talk about the same thing again. I've been guilty of doing that as well. So I think if I'd have read that, I would have just thought it's all about just, not wasting time.
Yeah. So if I'd have read Great Expectations before, I would have been as horrible as I am now. Then would have saved myself a lot of trouble. And I'd probably...
That's such a hint to former people in your life.
I'll make sure I don't post this anywhere where any of my ex-girlfriends will see it.
Obviously, we'll be back again next Monday.
Live show. Live show again.
Yes.
This is our first of our pre-recorded ones, and it's only week 2.
Yeah, without any editing though. So really,
this is just it's a live recorded version because I'm off trying to get a career and have it all.
Good luck.
Yeah,
Good luck with
it's not
that.
going to happen.
Have a great Monday, and don't forget to tweet us your thoughts. We're at P Dreadful Show, and I will say bye from Amita.
Find me on Tinder.
Oh God! Do not find Alex on Tinder. Probably be some travelling photo as well as some.
You've seen my
I know.
Tinder, I think, anyway.
I don't think no, I haven't.
You haven't. I'm
No,
disappointed.
I deleted it before I.
You came up on my Tinder.
Yeah, but then I deleted it when you told me that I came up, and I was like, I'm not having this.
Yeah,
I'm not having it.
That's a shame. I was gonna, if we'd have matched, I was gonna suggest we host a radio show, but I guess that's not gonna happen.
We've ruined everyone's Monday lunch already.
I hope it was the worst lunchtime of your life.
It's great. We did a radio show. They'll love it. Let us know your thoughts, and we will see you next week.
Bye.